of Locked On Pac-12 podcast. We're talking Devin Lloyd in our NFL draft segment, Oregon basketball's recruiting, and Remy Martin in the NCAA tournament. Make sure you stay tuned.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Pac-12 podcast. Thank you so much for making this your first listen every day. I'm your host, Cindy Robinson, former Pac-12 student athlete, and joining me today is our Locked On Ducks expert, Spencer McLaughlin. I'm about to start calling you like my just Locked On Pac-12 co-host because
I think we can move into that category.
Yeah, I feel like they need to know about Locked On Ducks, but like if you don't know by now, you'll figure it out at some point. But Spencer is, yes, my co-host at least 3 times a week. Sometimes he's the main host when I can't make it. I was traveling yesterday, so that was the case, and Spencer took over with Austin Facer. Is that how you say his last name? Because I haven't met him yet.
Yeah, Facer,
Okay.
Facer, new host of Locked On Utes. Go check him out anywhere you get your podcasts, or he'll be up on YouTube soon, I believe, but hit him up on Twitter too.
Love that. We're expanding here on the Pac-12 network.
Yes.
We need this. Okay, so kick things off while we're talking about Utah. I know you guys touched a little bit on how Devin Lloyd's impact, going to the NFL draft and possibly getting drafted top 5, top 10 or whatever, how that's boosting Utah stock, especially in the recruiting aspect. But we want to talk about Devin Lloyd today specifically. We've started this NFL draft segment, and it's been good so far, giving people the insight of like what's going on with some of these Pac-12 players, where they stand. And I'm hearing talks that people think that Devin Lloyd can be a top 5 NFL draft pick. Of course, we have to get Spencer's opinion there. I think so. I think he was one of the top players in the Pac-12, let alone Utah, obviously, but the Pac-12 for sure. And with everything Utah was able to accomplish, he was at the forefront of that. So I want to get your opinion because, he's not only facing other Pac-12 athletes, he's facing the rest of the conference's athletes that are entering the NFL draft.
Yeah, and I think he stacks up with any linebacker in this class from what I have seen. Now, I'm not Mel Kiper Jr. or Todd McShay, but when you listen to those two guys talk about Devin Lloyd, they sing his praises pretty often, and there's a reason. I think a lot of people saw in that Rose Bowl game a Utah defense that got picked apart a little bit by an even better Ohio State offense. And we know that especially in football today, whether it's college or pro, good offense is going to beat good defense far more often than not. So I wouldn't take anything away from that. But when you just watch the film on Devin Lloyd, there's no mystery as to why he's going to be a top 5 pick. A couple things that stand out the most. He's got the size, but it's his speed that really pops off the screen. His range, he I believe is playing middle linebacker at Utah. I could see a team drafting him and wanting to put him at outside linebacker so that he's covering sideline to sideline, but he's also the sort of guy that you could just draft. And if you need a middle linebacker, he will be that sort of guy. And if you listen to, anyone who's talked to him or knows him, they speak very highly about his character and his leadership on the field. And he's just been a staple in a Utah defense that really has been one of the best in the Pac-12 the last few years. When you look at the conference up and down, there aren't really that many teams that I would say have been known for defense. The football conference hasn't been known for that much.
Right.
They haven't been known for that many good things over the last few years, generally speaking. But I think that when you think about the best defenses in the Pac-12, you jump to Utah first. And Oregon fans know that better than any fan base in the Pac-12 because we could not score on Utah this year. I think it was 76 to 16, something like, in 2 games, it was just not even close. And the offense was held to, I think, 3 total points in 2 first halves. So Devin Lloyd is a big part of that. He had a pick 6 against Oregon off of Anthony Brown in the Pac-12 championship game. His speed is just blazing. He moves sideline to sideline, and to have a guy who can combine his physical traits with his instincts is what makes him a really intriguing draft prospect. And there's no way he falls out of the top 10. And I think his stock has gone up a little bit here in the last couple weeks or months leading up to the draft later this month. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the top 5, but I could see him going, maybe like to a New York Giants at number 7 as well, depending on how the first 5 picks shape out.
Well, the idea was that it was going to be the New York Giants at number 5 from what I'm reading. But here's my question.
Oh, yeah.
So another player we've discussed already, Kayvon Thibodeaux, was supposed to be the number 1 draft pick from the start of the season and on. Like, that was the conversation. And now there's a possibility that the first Pac-12 player will be Devin Lloyd off the board. What is that saying? Do you believe it, for one?
Yes, I could definitely see that happening with the way Thibodeau's stock has fallen, and we've talked about it extensively here on the pod. You can go back and listen or watch any of the episodes where we've talked about him. But in short, my take on that has been he's been a top pick in the draft for such a long time, and for a couple years watching Oregon broadcasts, the broadcast teams were always putting up graphics and talking about him as projected number 1 overall pick. When a guy sits in that spot for a couple years, I think people tend to just get bored with it. And senior year, or not senior year, this past year, his production dropped off a little bit because of an injury. So he didn't have the flashy stats that he certainly could have. His impact on the field was inarguable when he was there. It was a noticeable difference for Oregon's defense. But the biggest reason I think that Aiden Hutchinson now is probably going to go first overall to the Jags is his production this past year is just off the charts good. And he's also an elite physical traits guy. And that's what I had the opportunity actually to talk briefly with Mel Kiper Jr. about that. And that was the thing that he jumped to first is Hutchinson's production this season is giving NFL scouts a lot of tape to look at and see what his ceiling is. So that's why he's overtaken Thibodeaux. But now people are, I think, over critiquing Kayvon Thibodeaux, and that's fine. If he falls down to another team in the 8-9 range, then a better team will be getting a really high ceiling caliber player. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if Devin Lloyd went somewhere in the top 5 or maybe 6, and then Thibodeaux was in the 7 to 10 range.
I feel you. Okay. Coming up next, Spencer and I are going to talk his Oregon Ducks basketball recruiting situations that are happening in the last few weeks. This is the time of year that most people pretty much give up on their New Year's resolutions, especially when it comes to that whole eating healthy and trying to stay healthy and fit. It's hard, it is, but Built Bar is making it easier for everyone when it comes to the snacking, okay? If you haven't tried the Puffs yet, you have to. They're one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar. Best thing about Built Bar's protein bars, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, Puffs included, 100% real chocolate. So you're getting low calories, low sugar, low carbs, and high protein. You can't compare that to a candy bar because guess what? It's not as healthy, nowhere near. Like a candy bar, though, Built Bars come in different flavors from mint brownie, coconut almond, so many to choose from. From what I hear, Spencer's favorite is
mint brownie.
Mint brownie, okay.
Mint brownie all the way.
Okay, he's sticking with the mint brownie.
I've had about 4 of their flavors, and I liked them all. Peanut butter brownie's good, but mint brownie for the win, everybody.
All right. Well, if you want to go ahead and try mint brownie or a different flavor for yourself, go on and head on over to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you for making this your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. I forgot to mention, like, if you hear that my voice is a little raspy, I was working the NCAA Women's Final Four in Minnesota, and I'm trying to recover. You know what I mean? It's a struggle here. It sounded a lot worse the other day, so we're doing good right now because I had to whisper just days ago. So
Spencer, you would have been turning up the mic a good ways to be able to make it happen.
Like, how are you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
Yeah, see? At least you can hear me, though. At least you can hear me. Okay, on to Oregon basketball. NCAA season is officially over. We're going to talk a little bit about the tournament and one specific player that had some Pac-12 connections that played in there, but right now, Oregon basketball having some recruiting changes, getting ready for that, not necessarily next season, but possibly next season. And this is where I'm letting Spencer take over because there's there's a little rumor rolling around that someone who
Yeah.
got recruited and committed for 2023 might be trying to make the move a little sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so his name is Marquise Cook. He goes by Mookie Cook, or I think he's going to get to the level where he'll just be a first name guy and just be known as,
Mookie,
or a one name guy. He'll just be Mookie.
Mookie, just
Just,
Mookie,
just
maybe
Mookie.
Mook, maybe
Yeah,
Mook.
yeah. Forget Mookie Betts in baseball. It's all about college basketball. But
Right.
he's a tremendously talented guy. The number 4 or 5 overall recruit in the class of 2023, depending on where you look. Either way, everywhere's got him as top 5. He's listed in the class of 2023. There have been reports that he's reclassifying to the class of 2022, which I suppose would be great for the Ducks because they would then have 3 5-stars coming in the class of 2022 with Dior Johnson and Kello Ware already committed in that class.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say, and by the way, neither of us are sitting here claiming to be journalists. We are reporting what we are reading and finding out there. According to Andrew Nemec, who covers Oregon high school and college sports in the state and talks to recruits all the time, he said he spoke to Mookie Cook's family and that the reports of him reclassifying to the class of 2022 are false. Now, we'll see if that ends up staying the case because it could be an instance of where there's smoke, there's fire. And,
Right.
maybe Mookie told someone, but the final decision hadn't been made yet. And his family was maybe a little out of the, like, we don't know. But
Right.
if you see a report of he's reclassifying to 2022, that has not been confirmed and it has been denied by his family. But things are always subject to change. So that's just something we wanted to put out there and establish. But
Yeah.
Cook is a huge addition for the Oregon Ducks for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a big time player. Anytime you get a top 5 recruit in a college basketball class, it's a big time draw to your program. And what it can do is help with other recruiting, as I'll talk about in a moment. But the second thing is bringing in a player of that caliber who's 6'7", 200 pounds, can shoot the ball, very athletic, needs to work on his three-point shot a little bit, but overall has got a really high ceiling. He is coming to Oregon a year after the Ducks missed the tournament for just the second time in the last 10 years under Dana Altman. He's been the head coach for 12. He's missed tournament 4. 2 of those times were in his first 2 seasons. He won the CBI and then made a pretty good run in the NIT in year 2. But the last 10 years, just 2 times the Ducks have missed the tournament. So off of one of the 2 most disappointing seasons for Oregon in the last decade, quite literally, the fact that Dana Altman is then able to go out and still get a commitment from a recruit like that is, I think, a great sign for Duck fans in terms of the state of the Oregon basketball program. Because if you're at a low point and you're still able to bring in a recruit who was looking at schools like Kansas or Kentucky or Gonzaga or all these other places that were looking at a guy like Mookie Cook, same thing with Kello Ware, who is in the class of 2022. I think it's a great place to be if you're an Oregon Duck fan, because that's just a sign of the brand that Dana Altman has helped to establish of Oregon basketball, and it remains strong even after a down year in which they still won 20 games.
Well, let's talk about how Oregon getting Mookie could possibly attract, sorry, I'm looking for the right word there, attract some other top prospects, including Kwame Evans, who Mookie seems to have a relationship with and has already told Andrew Nemec that he has let him know he wants him there with him. He's the number 2 prospect in the class of 2023. Getting the 1 and 2 player in the one class, what would that mean for Oregon moving forward in the future, even if they do the one and done? Like, how great would that be for that Oregon class?
Well, I mean, as you look ahead to that season, I know we're a ways away, and there is no commitment yet from Kwame Evans Jr., but he is Oregon's next top target in the class of 2023, because the class of 2022 is really already set. There's a lot of players on the roster who will likely be returning. Unfortunately, Frank Kepnong is not one of them. We can touch on him in a moment, but this is the way recruiting often works. And when Nico Iamaleava decided to go to Tennessee instead of Oregon, with reports of the NIL deal and that whole thing and how it played out, the first thing that Nico said when he went to Tennessee is he wants to be a draw for other recruits, and that's often how this goes. Oregon football has seen that in the class of 2022 with Jaleel Tucker recruiting his teammate Jaleel Florence, who had committed to the Ducks, decommitted, stayed interested, ended up coming up to Eugene despite the coaching change from Mario Cristobal now to Dan Lanning.
Yeah.
It's just the way that it works. And I think it's even more so in basketball, right? The the AAU culture nationally and the circuit that these guys play on, you just get the sense that it's even tighter knit, because football is just so many more players and the roster is so much bigger.
Oh,
But
sick, for
basketball,
real.
yeah, it's much more condensed. It's much more, intuitive in terms of, if you get one guy, there's a greater chance he's going to be able to go and get another guy because, well, maybe they've played together since they were in 8th grade, or which I think is the case between
Kwame.
Evans and Cook. They've known each other at least for that long.
Yeah.
And so when you look at those guys and the potential to bring in another high-end recruit, you could have 2 top 5 players in the class of 2023. That would be a really huge acquisition for Dana Altman, even if you have him go one and done. I mean, Duke's been doing it for years, and they were just in the Final Four. And yeah, it's hard, but it's a reality of college basketball. And you'd rather have these guys for a year and see if you can maximize that one season and get what you can out of them than having not had them at all. English is really fun. So I think that it's good that the Ducks are keeping their goals high and still able to bring in recruits like that.
Yeah. Okay. Coming up next, we're going to continue this Oregon basketball talk. I just had to, break things up a little bit because Spencer will talk all day. I promise you, he loves this stuff.
Yeah, I got to cut myself off sometimes.
But no, because you're giving the people what they need to hear, and that's what they're tuning in for. So we love it. It's not a negative, but I just got to, break things up a little bit here to let everyone know about betonline.net. It's your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline is where the game starts. I'm not a huge betting person, but when I do like to dibble and dabble, BetOnline is so easy to work with because it's kind of, easy to read. It's easy to work with. It's not difficult for you newcomers like me, and you'll love it if you've already been in the betting world. So, Spencer, are you into betting? Are you like a heavy bettor?
I dabble. I will dabble. I will dabble here and there. I will say this: the Masters is coming up this week. Don't try and pick a winner. It's a sucker's bet. You want to go top 10s and top 20s. That's where you'll hit some real value. Top 10s and top 20s.
Spencer has advice everywhere for you guys. I'm telling you. And also the way his face read when he said I dabble just told me everything I need to know. So definitely trust his advice. I think he knows what he's talking about. Make sure you go ahead on over to betonline.net and check it out for yourself. All right, so I want to continue with this Oregon basketball talk because I know you had some conversations about Frank leaving and how I said Frank, right? Okay, making sure. These names, it's so hard to keep up with everybody's names, I promise you. But one thing you and I were discussing before we started recording was how, like, getting these top prospects coming in, like Mookie Cook and possibly Kwame Evans, is a huge deal for the Pac-12, not just Oregon itself, but for the Pac-12, because Pac-12 tends to lose out on players like Remy Martin to teams that are going to actually contend for national championships. Now, I will say, out of every sport, basketball is the one sport that Pac-12 actually competes in, but we saw how they did in the NCAA tournament, and that wasn't very encouraging for any, recruiting prospects, in my opinion. And so moving forward, we have to find a way to retain our top prospects. It's one thing to get them, right? But it's another thing to retain them. So let's talk about Frank leaving, and then let's talk about Remy Martin's departure and how he did in the national championship game.
Yeah, so Frank Kepnong spent the last 2 years at Oregon. He's a very raw prospect coming out of Cameroon originally, big energy guy, started to develop his offensive game and show the skill as the season went on. And I think the biggest reason he's leaving the Ducks and could become a productive player and a starting caliber center for another Power 5 team is just playing time. And Folly Dante, as of now, when we're recording this, is still on the roster. His future, a little bit uncertain, but Oregon is bringing in a 5-star freshman, Kello Ware, who's 7 feet tall. Now, I talked about this on the most recent episode of Locked On Ducks. Go check out the YouTube channel for Locked On Ducks, and you can get the segment there just talking about Kello Ware. Yeah, I think that he could play power forward, and you could play Keloware with N'Faly Dante or Frank Kepnong. As you know, those two bigs for Oregon this year, Kepnong and Dante, have been interchangeable. They're a very similar player. Neither one is going to stretch the floor at all, but they're big bodies inside. They rebound really well, shot blocking, energy, hustle plays. That's what they're there for, and both are very capable. But I think Kepnong looks around and sees a five-star reserve big in Nate Biddle, who didn't play a lot this year, and Folly Dante was a five-star recruit as well. Keloware, a five-star coming in, and Kepnong's a really talented guy, and he was a very highly rated recruit coming out of Cameroon originally, and I think he just looks around and says, I'm not going to be able to maximize my full potential here. And he's right, because he could go to another school, a Power 5 school. Heck, he could stay within the Pac-12. I'm sure there are a number of schools who would come to him and say, hey, you could be probably our starting center and play 25, 28 minutes a night, as opposed to, 18 to 20 for Oregon, just because the front court's about to be so crowded. So that's why I imagine that he left. And that's not typically the sort of player that you talk about when, as you were mentioning, Cindy, sorry.
It's okay.
It's an early morning.
Right.
But the sorts of players that the Pac-12 as a conference needs to be able to retain. You have a two-time first-team All Pac-12 performer in Remy Martin. He goes to Kansas. He's actually the preseason Big 12 Player of the Year. He didn't live up to that sort of hype, but I think you're nuts to say that Kansas wouldn't have been worse off without him on their team. He had stretches in the NCAA tournament where he was taking games over, where he's giving you spurts. He was in it at the defensive end. And I think that it speaks to his character that he was coming in, expected to be the number one point guard, probably one of the top guys up there with Ochai Agbaji, who was the most outstanding player this year on the men's side. And, congrats to Kansas on winning national championship. I did pick them in my bracket, so I was kind of okay with that. But I think that it's a testament to his character that he was expected to be number one, and he was willing to be the sixth man off the bench. I mean, he didn't start most of the year. I think he did early on, and then he wasn't playing very well. He went to the bench, and he thrived. But in the Pac-12, he was a high-caliber player, and Kansas knows the sort of guy that they were getting and what his ceiling is. And, Bobby Hurley down at Arizona State just has been struggling. They've had a down year. And I think when you look at players like that leaving the conference to go to the Big 12, which is probably the best basketball conference in the country, in my opinion, ACC is up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that you have to have the coaching. You have to have the coaching and make the investment with your head coaches and your staffs to keep them around, because if you don't, you can, start to have programs that fall off, and then players like Remy Martin leave. And that's why it's important to keep, the conference pedigree up, right, across the league, because if you don't have a number of good teams in the conference, then it feels like you're not getting the sort of exposure, not going to have the chance to win that you want to. Then, guys are going to have the opportunity to leave, and they're going to take it, as Remy Martin did. So I don't think it's a huge issue yet for the Pac-12, but I think it's something to keep an eye on. And, Bobby Hurley down at Arizona State, he's had a rough go of it the last couple of years. I'd be surprised if they brought him back, but it also seems like a lot of the firings and hirings have been made. So hopefully he's able to turn around for the conference, because Arizona State more than capable of being a tournament team. They just haven't been there and haven't been able to get guys like Remy Martin to their program or keep him around when they do.
This reminds me that you and I will probably need to go over the way too early top 25 list, see where Pac-12 is standing. I love those because it's like, why are you doing this right now? But it's also really just a reflection of how the season ended, in a sense, and kind of a recap. That's what I look at it as. So we'll do that next episode and give the people a little bit of idea where Pac-12 is sitting at after the end of the NCAA season. I'm a little nervous to look at it, though, because it wasn't a strong finish.
It wasn't the strongest finish on the men's side. The women fared a little bit better. Of course, Stanford getting back to the Final Four. But, I think that UCLA team, and I truly believe this, and I thought that coming into the year and coming into the tournament, even when they were a 4 seed after some losses in their Pac-12 schedule, including 2 against Oregon. Shameless plug for my team. But I think that UCLA team was good enough to win a national championship. I mean, that game that they played with North Carolina was one of the best of the tournament. And unfortunately, Caleb Love was just hotter down the stretch. And if UCLA wins that game, there's no reason they could not have been playing Kansas last night, as we record this Tuesday morning after Kansas overcame a 16-point deficit, the largest in NCAA tournament history. There's no reason UCLA couldn't have had the chance to blow a 16-point lead to Kansas in that game. I think when you look at their depth, their talent, their versatility, and their experience on the ball, and the guys they had coming back from a Final Four run last year, they could have done it. But unfortunately, Caleb Love was he was cold in the championship game. He was cold in the championship game. That might have cost North Carolina, but man, that guy throughout the tournament, was he impressive. I have no clue how North Carolina was an 8 seed. That is a good basketball team.
I know. I literally kept thinking that, like, was this the
8
right
seed? Like, you just look at some of the other 8 seeds. Boise State was an 8 seed. They got waxed by Memphis. I mean, like, it wasn't even close. And Memphis was underseeded as a 9 because they had some injuries and guys coming and go and whatnot.
Right.
But still, Boise State was an 8 seed, and you never felt that, after watching them for 5 minutes, most people for the first time in this season, they saw Boise for the first time against Memphis and thought that there's no way they
Why are
could
you
beat
even
Gonzaga.
here? Right.
You watch North Carolina play, you watch them beat Baylor, you watch them beat UCLA, you're like, I'm sorry, that's a 3 seed. What am I missing? They've got shooting, they've got athleticism, they've got size, they can rebound. I mean, they're
aggressive.
Hubert Davis had a fantastic year, and UCLA took them right down to the wire. UCLA was in control for most of that game. I think that Arizona had a good season and definitely had the talent to get to a national championship game. I think you're asking a lot from a first-year head coach to do that. That's why it's so impressive what Hubert Davis did for the Tar Heels. But I think you look at, the squad that Mick Cronin had this year, as he said correctly, they brought UCLA basketball, the brand sort of back, put them back on the map. And I agree with that 100% because they were kind of down a little bit and they were an 11 seed last year, but they make the run. They followed up with a Sweet 16 appearance, and they had the team to go all the way, but chips just didn't fall.
Yeah. All right. Well, you live to play another day.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Spencer, for giving us your insight. You'll catch me and Spencer sometime again later this week. Don't know if it'll be probably Thursday. Either way, make sure you guys check out Locked On Pac-12 and Locked On Ducks on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and wherever you get your podcasts. And then, obviously, thank you for making this your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. So why wouldn't you want to make it your first listen? After you make Locked On Ducks your second listen, go ahead and make Locked On NFL Draft your third listen. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Other than that, make sure you guys continue to stay locked on Pac-12 on the Locked On Network. Go ahead.
Gotta throw it up.